Hey, it's Ari with Japan Travel Pros. Thanks for checking in. This is another Japan Travel Pros quick tip, where we take one question that comes up when you're planning a trip to Japan and give you a useful answer in less than 10 minutes. And this time the question is, when does fall actually start in Japan? So it turns out there's a lot of information out there describing September as the beginning of fall, or autumn if you will, fall or autumn in Japan, and describing October as a time for comfortable autumn weather. Well, that's not completely wrong, but it's also not a particularly useful way to think about Japan travel as a whole, especially based on what we've been experiencing in recent years. The calendar alone doesn't tell you when autumn starts in Japan for the purposes of your trip. In Tokyo, Kyoto, Osaka, and much of central and western Japan, even a bit of eastern Japan for that matter, as long as you're not going up north, September can still be very much summer. That means hot, humid, short sleeve weather, lots of air conditioning, stay hydrated, seek out shade, all of these things, pretty much like July and August. Now, what about October? Well, October can be considerably more comfortable, particularly as the month goes on. But even October these days, especially earlier in October, that might not give you the crisp autumn weather you have in mind. Now, none of this means that September or October are bad times to visit Japan. On the contrary, they can be great times to visit as long as you're coming in with the right expectations. A good time to visit Japan and a good time to experience autumn travels in Japan aren't necessarily the same thing. One big reason we're talking about this is that there's still a lot of questionable information out there, information about fall or autumn in Japan that doesn't really reflect what travelers and local Japan residents have been experiencing here in recent years. Historical averages can be accurate, but not useful. Older travel information may have been correct when it was written, but you're planning a trip right now, or for later this year or next year, depending on when you're listening to this. So know this: 2023, 2024, and 2025 were Japan's 3 warmest Septembers on record. As we're recording this, it is on the eve of September for 2026, and we can anticipate what's likely going to be another record year. If not a record, close to it, the point being much warmer than normal if you define normal as some kind of 30-year average or 50-year average or even 100-year average. It really depends what kind of data set you're working with. Now you might ask, well, doesn't weather vary from year to year? It does, and we could certainly have a cooler September or October, nobody knows. But right now we're looking at a multi-year pattern. There's no reason to plan a future trip assuming that that pattern is suddenly going to reverse or even change significantly. Another thing to keep in mind is that Japan doesn't have one uniform autumn. We can't simply say fall starts in Japan in October, for example, because, well, Japan stretches a long way from northeast to southwest. And in addition to latitude, elevation also makes a pretty big difference. Now, generally speaking, if you go farther north or higher in elevation, autumn does arrive earlier, so you can probably experience some kind of autumn in Japan in October, but the question is where and how, to what degree. And there's another piece to this. Fall weather and fall colors aren't necessarily the same thing. You can have a beautiful, comfortable October day in Kyoto, or even Takayama for that matter, while most of the foliage around you is still pretty green. At the same time, somewhere farther north, like Tohoku or Hokkaido, or higher in elevation, such as Kamikochi or the Japan Alps at higher altitudes, those may already have autumn colors. The exact timing, of course, changes every year, which is why we don't recommend building a trip around one supposedly perfect peak date for fall foliage or autumn colors. So what do we actually recommend? Well, if someone tells us experiencing autumn in Japan is really important, that affects the advice that we give them. For a typical itinerary centered on Tokyo, Kyoto, and/or Osaka, yes, that's the golden route. If cooler autumn weather and fall colors are priorities for you, we're generally looking at November rather than September or October. And depending on the year and the destination, even early or mid-December, well, those aren't necessarily too late. In fact, sometimes we'll have U.S. clients, for example, say, oh, well, I need to leave after U.S. Thanksgiving. I can only visit Japan in late November and into December. Hey, you're in luck. In recent years, we have seen in the Kansai area, Osaka, Kobe, Kyoto, Nara, etc., we've seen great fall colors starting in late November all the way into December. For a few of these years, we've seen reds and oranges on those Japanese maples around Christmas time up to New Year's Eve even. If your dates are fixed in October and fall colors are important to you, that's when we'd start looking at destinations much farther north and probably at higher elevation at that. Again, it depends on when in October we're talking about. Okay, Ari, bottom line it for us. If fall colors are important to you, approach the planning from both directions. If your travel dates are fixed, ask where in Japan is autumn likely to be happening during those dates. If there's somewhere you particularly want to experience autumn, such as Kyoto with the famous gardens and shrines and temples, then turn the question around and ask, when should we go there? Match your dates to the destination, or match your destination to your dates. Wrapping it up, September and October in Japan can both be excellent times to visit here, but know that those might not necessarily be the fall or autumn that you're looking for. Now, the point isn't to avoid those months, it's to have realistic expectations about the weather and what the season is likely to look and feel like. Now, when you're researching your trip, pay attention not only to historical averages, but also to what's actually been happening in Japan in recent years. And remember, if experiencing autumn is important to your trip, don't just ask when you're going, ask where you're going too. Thanks for listening to the end, and until next time, safe travels.